You know, every time I drive across the Interstate Bridge from Portland to Vancouver, I'm thrilled by the sight of the Columbia River, sometimes Mount Hood, sometimes the Vancouver waterfront, and every once in a while I say a little prayer that the bridge will keep standing. Yeah, it's that old. We should all care about its replacement and when that will happen, and I know that you do care, and that's why it's our big story tonight. When it comes to the new I-5 bridge between Portland and Vancouver, there are all kinds of issues that have been, are, and will be debated in the months and years to come. One thing, though, that's not really up for debate, the fact that the bridge needs replacing. The northbound side was built when Woodrow Wilson was president. 1917 is when that happened. And on the other side, it was when Eisenhower was in Oval Office. That's 1958, you guys, which means when the next big earthquake hits, well, you know, it's coming sooner or later. That current bridge probably going to be in a really, really bad shape. So tonight we're going to dive into the latest developments when it comes to building new bridges, starting with what could it look like and ending with how's that going to be paid for again? And you can bet we're going to talk tolling. Also, we're going to be talking about an early idea of what it could cost to cross the bridge. And you might hear the letters IBR in this segment. That's an acronym for Interstate Bridge Replacement. All right, ready to go? Excellent. You can use that on your neighbors, by the way. Let's start with design. The current plan right now is to have a fixed span bridge. It's going to sit about 116 feet above the Columbia River. Fixed span means it's just going to sit there. It's not going to go up and down like we currently have now. Okay? But there's a little snag in that plan. Back in February, the Coast Guard raised objections to that fixed span plan. It's not high enough for them. They want a bridge that can rise 178 feet above the water to allow bigger ships to go underneath. That's the clearance for the current drawbridge. And to achieve that kind of height, well, yeah, they'd sort of need another drawbridge. When the Coast Guard says that, by the way, it's pretty serious stuff. A couple of weeks ago, federal transportation authorities ordered the bridge planners to start studying drawbridge plans, things like costs and impact. However, the director of the bridge replacement program, Greg Johnson, seems a little skeptical on that. He told us he's confident the fixed bridge design is going to win out. He said the study of the drawbridge option will not affect the project schedule. He said, quote, external stakeholders want to move forward with a fixed span, end quote. Construction is scheduled to begin sometime in 2025. But that timeline depends on the federal government's approval, along with billions in federal money. And you may be connecting the dots here. If the Coast Guard, a federal entity, is not happy with the current design, will the feds give final approval? Republican Senator Bill Hansel of Athena asked ODOT Director Chris Strickler about that very issue last month.
So as it relates to design, I think the macro scale of the design is pretty well formed. Light rail into Vancouver, the number of lanes, those kinds of things. But when you look at the details of the bridge itself, we are still looking at the movable span portion. Would there be a cost increase? Absolutely. And I can tell you unequivocally, a cost of a movable span is more than a cost of a fixed span. And so we know that that would cost more. We don't know how much more yet, but it could be upwards of $500 million just for the bridge portion alone.
Does the Coast Guard have veto power over the design?
Chair Gomberg, Senator Hansel, I'll define that by saying yes, because they have a bridge permit that we have to get from them in order for us to enter into construction. So my hope is that it never constitutes a veto authority, though.
So kind of like yes, but we hope not? So it's possible the Coast Guard disrupts this process. But the same issue came about during the Columbia River crossing project. That was back in 2012. The 116-foot fixed bridge versus a drawbridge. And at that time, the bridge team was able to placate the Coast Guard by offering to pay companies upriver around $90 million since they would not be able to maneuver their products under the 116-foot bridge. But time will tell if that is going to happen this time around. Now, we know Vancouver's mayor does not want the drawbridge option. Here's what she had to say to Laurel Porter during Straight Talk last week.
What about the reports that a new bridge would still have a drawbridge that stalls everybody?
No.
Not going to happen?
We're not going to have that. No. I'm confident that the IBR team will look at the mitigation costs for the three companies upstream and the cost for the drawbridge, whatever type they're looking at. It doesn't make sense. We have a window. It can't be too high for the airplanes, has to be high enough for the ships. But even those three companies up north, or upstream from the bridge don't use that lift as people would think. Once in 10 years, that isn't justification to have the entire world of Vancouver stop for those opportunities, and the cost would be incredible.
That is one forceful mayor. And just so you know, yes, we hear those of you at home wondering or maybe yelling, what about tunneling under the river instead of going over the river with a bridge? Well, the idea really has not gained any momentum since that original Columbia River crossing plan back in 2012, and it seems incredibly unlikely at this point in the game, more unlikely even than a new drawbridge. Now, let's talk about funding, shall we? The latest estimate for the cost of a new bridge is around $6 billion, with some estimates going as high as $7.5 billion. Lawmakers in Washington have already earmarked $1 billion for the bridge. And right now, lawmakers in Oregon are crafting their own plan to chip in a cool $1 billion. The legislature's Joint Committee on Transportation revealed a plan to use $700 million in bonds against ODOT's State Highway Fund tax revenue. I think that is about things like gas taxes, vehicle registration, freight truck fees. The remaining $300 million would be from bond sales from the state's general fund. And there's been talk of capping the total cost of the bridge project, while lawmakers say it cannot cost more than $6.3 billion. At least that's what they hope. The plan has not passed through Salem just yet, so those elements, they could still change, but that's where things stand right now. And that potential cap on the project's total cost is worth noting. Right now, the best guess, $6 billion. But if the Columbia River crossing project back in 2012 was any indication, costs can really get out of control really fast. And it's clear lawmakers don't want that to happen. This week, we talked to Representative Susan McLean, a Democrat from Hillsborough and co-chair on the Joint Committee on Transportation, to ask about the funding plan.
Right now, we are simply committing to being a good partner with Washington State, and we are simply committing to the $1 billion to keep us going in this process and keep us on schedule. The most important item that we can have right here as a goal is to stay on schedule so we can try for federal funding for the infrastructure package that came out of the federal government, so that we can make sure that the project doesn't cost us more money, so we can get it done on time.
So hopefully that'll all work. How much money the federal government is going to kick in, still a huge issue. The latest estimate from Bridge Project folks show that they're hoping for between $2.5 and $3 billion from D.C.
If the state is doing their job, we're going to get this out this session, and we hopefully will have something voted on hopefully by the beginning of May. And the reason for that is because many of the infrastructure grants, both competitive and non-competitive, that we're interested in garnishing from the federal government package are due in May. So we want to be able to stand right there at the head of the queue and show that Washington State and Oregon State have their act together and are working hard on putting together an interstate bridge replacement that's going to serve for 100 years at least.
Well, let's hope so. And if you've been doing the math in your head throughout all this, you'll realize, there's a gap. $1 billion from Washington, $1 billion from Oregon. Let's be generous. Pretend the project gets $3 billion from the feds. That's $5 billion. And the best guess for the total cost right now is $6 billion. So where is that extra $1 billion going to come from? I bet a few of you have a guess.
The rest is from tolling.
Yeah. Nobody likes to say that word.
I don't mind. I'm from the East Coast. I grew up with tolling. It's a user fee.
Yeah.
We should all be paying user fees.
Maybe. So now you know how the co-chair of the legislature's Ways and Means Committee, the Money and Budget Committee, feels about tolling. That was Senator Elizabeth Steiner. But yes, the funding gap will be fulfilled by you and me and anyone else who uses the bridge with tolling. And just last week, a committee in the Washington legislature heard testimony on a bill that would allow tolling on the bridge. This is mostly ceremonial because back in 2012, the legislature gave authorization for tolling on the Columbia River crossing plan, which never happened. But this bill has another purpose as well, and that's to ensure that tolling revenue is used only for the existing and future I-5 bridge projects.
With the passage of this bill, the I-5 bridge replacement would become the 7th piece of infrastructure that we've tolled in order to fund its construction. And it's really fun to cut ribbons and open projects. It's less fun to pay for them.
We have recognized that there would be tolling on this bridge from its inception. And so this is something that needs to be done. We do need a new bridge there. We can argue about the design and how many lanes and how many GP lanes and how many HOV lanes and whether we put light rail on it or not. All of those things need to be decided, but we all know that it needs to be tolled. That's the only way we're going to get it funded.
So there you go. Nobody testified against the bill in person last week, by the way, but there were 4 people who testified in favor. One of them was the administrator of the bridge project. You'd expect that. His name's Greg Johnson. But we thought it was noteworthy to point out that someone else who was there in support of the bill, a lobbyist representing the grocery chain Fred Meyer. Yeah, basically they were making the point that a new, less congested bridge outweighs any cost of tolls. The committee also talked about how programs for low-income folks are still being discussed, whether they'll pay less of a toll or maybe just get to cross for free. And the plan as it stands right now is to use variable rate tolling. That means the prices go up during morning and evening rush hour and then go back down during the off-rush hour hours. The idea is to discourage people from traveling at peak times if they don't have to, and in theory, reduce congestion. And many of you are sitting at home now and wondering, well, how much will these tolls be? State lawmakers in Washington were wondering that as well.
Do you have any rough estimate of what the toll amounts might be, a range?
Right now, we are studying a range between $1.50 per trip to $3.50 per trip. That's what we are studying. Ultimately, it will be the 2 transportation commissions in each state that set that final rate.
And by the way, when Greg Johnson says per trip, we're assuming he means one way. So that means if you need to cross the bridge at rush hour once in the morning and once in the evening, you could be paying $7 a day. But again, those are just the numbers being studied, and ODOT and WashDOT will have the final say. But if the bridge project folks are studying those numbers, you can get a pretty good bet that it's what's going to end up actually happening. So tolling is coming for the new I-5 bridge. Buckle up. Let's do a quick recap on the many updates to the bridge project that we touched on today. First, a new bridge is needed. Not much argument there. The fixed span is the current design that seems most likely, but the Coast Guard doesn't really like it, so we'll see. They could, I stress could, deny a critical permit for the construction if they really dislike it. When it comes to funding, it's $1 billion each from Oregon to Washington, with lawmakers in Salem still ironing out the exact details of our plan. If that gets done, the hope is the feds will chip in a few billion and the rest will be paid for by tolls. So, what comes next? The ever-critical review of the drawbridge plan and the release of the environmental impact statement that's expected later this year. We'll be watching. We'll bring you more in-depth coverage just like this as the plan moves forward. But we also want to hear from you. What are your thoughts about the new bridge and the plan as it stands right now? Let us know, will you? Send us an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.